Hello, everybody, and welcome to this live chat with Roberto Minervini. He doesn't need any kind of introduction. My name is Giona Nazzaro, and I'm the artistic director of the Locarno Film Festival. Before we start talking with Roberto, I want you to remember that you can see some of his films, such as Low Tide, Stop the Pounding Heart, and Louisiana, The Other Side, on DAFilms. So, and as usual, you can also ask questions to Roberto, and the people hosting this conversation will forward them to me. So, Roberto, welcome. Welcome for making time in your busy schedule for this talk with us. It's a great pleasure. It's a great honor. Last time we met, it was in Switzerland, in Nyon, during Visions du Réel. And we had a very interesting and emotional chat that has burned itself into the hearts of the visitors of Visions du Réel. And I hope you don't mind if we start exactly from that point, because when you were discussing your latest film, some of the things that we saw happening in the States were seemed still very far away, and no one could imagine that it would happen with the violence it actually happened. So if the title of your film was Imagining a World on Fire, some months later the world really exploded. So I know this might sound a bit uh, but your film really touched on a very sensitive, to say the least, aspect of the contemporary North American society. Some might say that that's always been like that, but I mean, what happened after your film was released was somehow even more violent and brutal. So, how did you live everything that came after?
Yeah, first of all, thanks for having me, and it's great seeing you and talking to you again, Jonah. Yeah, I remember that conversation very well that we had in Switzerland. At that time, one of the characters of my film had just gotten shot, and that is the older brother, Ronaldo, of my last film. And I had just gotten the news via text message just right before doing a Q&A at the festival, and that was very touching. I remember we all got very emotional about it, and that brings us to the point of that you're making with your comment or question. First, I can't, I can't say that my films were ahead of time in terms of as far as showing what's happening in today's America, just because I had no idea that the issues I touched were going to become mainstream, or just the awareness around what the issues of certain clusters of violence, clusters of despair, clusters of insubordination, and I didn't know that they were going to explode the way they did in very recently, especially in 2020. All I knew is that living here, especially in the American South, it feels like being at the front line, in the front line, and I have a privileged, observation point where I'm from. I'm in southern Texas. I'm next to Louisiana. I'm very close to Oklahoma. I'm very close to Mississippi. And that's where my films take place. So I was aware. I was aware of what was going on. I just didn't know the magnitude. And my films, in a way, that's what they are: an attempt for me to experience firsthand what's going on in some of the communities in the American South, and trying to get a sense of the magnitude of the issue. And then, like everybody else, I follow the developments that come after these films are made, and I perhaps realized that my experience was actually just symptomatic of something much bigger. So this is part of my process: try to go and experience firsthand, engage the magnitude of the stories and the communities that I'm observing, that I'm living with for a long time.
Thank you for this very specific answer, and I hope the audience doesn't mind that we are jumping straight to the point, because it feels that, as we said before, your film anticipated something, but it feels as if your films are still part of an ongoing conversation, because your last film was somehow also, let's say, quote unquote, the gaze of an outsider. And we know that American society has always had a kind of issue when people from outside look at what's happening in their homes, in their backyard. So is this still going on, or this has slightly changed? For instance, it also happened with Gianfranco Rossi's film Below Sea Level, that in the beginning it was not exactly well received. Things have changed over time. So I want to ask you if this has also changed in regards to your work and what you are doing with that.
So as far as the film realm, the film world is concerned, things are getting much worse. Now, the issue of representation, self-representation, and therefore establishing the parameters based on which an observer, a filmmaker, is considered an outsider or an insider, have become very binary, very strict. Now there are some funds, very important institutions that I'm not going to mention here in America, for which you can only get funded if you're part of the community. So to be racial and class convergence or affinity is not enough. You had to be a part of a community, which so it depends from a filmmaker. So if you're talking about the filmmaking, cinema as an institution, things are getting tighter. There are more obstacles about representation. So we are more of I am more of an outsider. As far as if we go into a layer deeper, then I see perhaps as a consequence of the limitations in what we can represent, what stories we can tell. I feel that there is more of a need from people for their stories to be told. Every time I access the community, every time I decide to embark on a long journey with them, I feel that there is a deeper level of commitment and appreciation from people, knowing that those changes don't come around very often. In the case of my last film, the Black Panther Party had asked me to continue working with them simply because there are many people who want to work with them, simply because digging deep into some issues is just not convenient. It doesn't make sense. It doesn't make financial sense. So the situation that I'm witnessing, that I'm in, is strange. To be an outsider as an observer, no, I think things have gotten better. I have credibility. I've been telling stories of several communities for a long time, and I am very credible as a voice. Institutionally, though, oh yes, I do feel more of an outsider, which makes me question really how I'm going to continue doing what I'm doing. That's a question that has for which I have not found an answer yet.
But have you had to address some of these issues also publicly in conversations with audiences or other filmmakers? Because this is a crucial question to filmmaking and documentary, the freedom that sometimes you might have if you access, quote unquote, from the outside a certain group of people instead of accessing them from the inside. Of course, there's also the issue of how to decolonialize the approach and how to warrant a larger access and also different strategies of representation and allowing different voices to be heard. But in terms of what we still call documentary, sometimes it's exactly this meeting of an quote unquote outside gaze with the community and the creative and political frictions that this meeting produces that has created some of the more interesting films.
Yeah. No, that's I mean, yes. I've I've been engaging in in this dialectics and conversations with audiences and colleagues and for a long time, especially for the last two films, where the issue of representation and the need to decolonialize, like you say, cinema is very pertinent. It's very relevant in what I do, right? Especially in the last film, which is about, we could generalize and saying the Black struggle, which is already something that I'm saying it here for ease of understanding, and I'm already denying that I said it because this is not just what the film is about, but it's for ease of understanding. The debate is intense. The debate is very thorough. The point is, decolonializing cinema, for example, is very important representation of certain communities. But one issue that is not solved with that is the class issue, right? How to represent from a position of power another class that is subject to that power. In the media, that is very pertinent. And it seems like I agree with the decolonization of cinema in a way. Now we can talk about that. How do you solve that conundrum of being a white filmmaker and going to represent others, being a liberal elitist filmmaker and going to represent right-wing extremisms? But it seems to me, with the debates that I've been engaged in, that the issue of class is completely bypassed, as if convergence into racial, ethnical, and cultural convergence is enough of a parameters, or enough parameters to make you fit and qualified to represent other people. The class issue is not considered, I think, and that is why do I mention class issue? Because especially in the last film, with the African American communities in the South, my presence has been not only welcome, but I've been asked to continue being, offering people a platform. It's just because of the fact that I am I'm putting my own position of power to the service for another socioeconomic class, which is where people feel trapped into. being black in that case, and I don't want to speak on behalf of anybody, but this is what I'm reporting for the people who told me being black for us, being represented by our own, black people is not enough for us to solve the conundrum of being voiceless. That doesn't make me a voice. So that doesn't make it. This is not an answer for anything. But I'm just saying it's a complicated issue, and I think bottom line is films are the expression of an experience, and it's my experience, and I must be held accountable for the experience and for the stories I'm telling, and I'm taking responsibility for them. As to why I'm doing what I'm doing, yeah, we can talk about it, but I know I'm responsible for what I'm doing. There is a lot of awareness from my part about what I'm doing and why, and the risks I'm taking.
But for instance, since we are witnessing again the war between Israel and Palestine in Gaza, and if I think of what we know about Israel and Palestine, it still boils down to some very engaged filmmakers such as Avi Mograbi, Eyal Sivan, and also the extremely critical Israeli left that has been relentlessly criticizing and attacking the right-wing expansionism in Palestine. So, and one of the most important films made on in this ongoing conflict has been made by Eyal Sivan and Michel Clefi together. So what I'm saying is maybe the idea of making a film, quote unquote, on somebody else's community is exactly what makes sense. This coming together, this meeting for a short amount of time and still exchanging some meaningful information that will be passed on to the viewer and generations of viewer in order to discuss these images, these ideas, and so on. And whereas right now it seems that what is asked is to offer definitive answers, and I'm not sure if this is the case, but somehow I have this idea that questions are not allowed, not allowed. I mean, it seems as if questions themselves are somehow part of the problem, where what people are actually looking for is kind of declarations more than questions.
It's very important. Yeah. No, sorry, I'm not interrupting, Giona. Go ahead.
No. I just wanted to say that I don't know if this makes sense, but for me, what's interesting in documentary filmmaking, especially the kind of works that you are doing, it's not about giving some definite set of answers, but opening different fronts of possible questions. And this can only happen if there is also some radical diversity at play.
Yeah, I think you said a lot of, your comment contain a lot of important points, and maybe I'll try to touch them for the viewers now, for the audiences. And I had to say, with the audiences, usually I always received, a lot of appreciation. Audiences talk about kinship, so the value of how my films show the community, how they stick together through kinship, so through valuing the relationship they have. That is the very important leitmotif in my films. Our community sticks together despite everything, despite this kind of discourse over representation or not. and what is represented about them. It's very important. That is an important part, and people appreciate that. When people from that feel more affinity to what I've represented, for example, African American viewers watching my last film, uh, libertarians, or watching my previous film, The Other Side, religious communities watching Stop the Bleeding Heart, they felt that sense of kinship. A kinship only emerges if you give voice to it. Now, you mentioned the issue of trying to give a definite set of answers, which kind of hampers the debate. Again, since there are viewers here, and maybe since we are also talking about what I do, then I can mention something. So what is it that I try to do? What is it that I think I do in a nutshell? I think I experience reality, and then I manufacture a story based on reality experience, and I show it to the audiences. The viewers experience the story, and they manufacture an idea of reality based on just on the story. So there is a discrepancy there, and what can I? There's a gap. Okay, I've experienced something big. I'm telling something small. Audiences experience something small, and they need to envision, imagine, figure out something big. Now, I have all the power, so I could do two things. One, give the audiences an illusion that they are part of this big experience. Yeah, and that's how I can, by giving answers, a set of answers and judgments, I can tell the audiences, now you have the whole picture, so listen to me. And these are the answers. Or I can actually just continue to tell you, this is just my personal experience, and what you see is what you get. They will mirror something. My films will mirror something for you. You have your own set values, your ideology, your preconceived ideas of what's or right or wrong. So your morality, and you find your own answers. And my films have been praised for lack of judgment, but lack of judgment is not just a personal trait of the filmmaker or myself. It's precisely because of what you're saying. If I give audiences definite answers, then I'm manipulating them completely. I'm holding power. That is, in a way, supremacy over the audiences. Because I have this big experience the audiences don't have. Audiences only have my little story. And if I try to tell them this is the reality, I am lying. So it is very important whether we represent the other or represent the community we belong. I think the most important thing for me is to be sure that we're not telling people that what they see, which is just this, is the reality. And that is much more important than the discourse on documentary and fiction. What they see is my story, my account on an experience that is big. And my experience is big, but the reality is even bigger. So we have to be very honest about what we do. We're just telling a story. We're trying to tell people, think about it, deepen your knowledge about what you see if you want to. And that's why my films, then we can find that, wow, something real has happened years after, because that's what I was trying to say. That's my experience. You just saw a small story. And if you dig deeper, you find, yeah, you get closer and closer to something very real.
What you're saying makes totally sense to me, because it felt like that at the end of the 80s, the beginning of the 90s, some major shift happened in documentary filmmaking, where we moved from the traditional issue-oriented filmmaking to a diverse set of documentary experiences. Let's say the reinvention through filmic means of the real, the abstract observational tools, or the way that documentary interacted with some of the new technologies, the sensory approach, and so on. It feels that this is somehow being questioned, as if we are at the point where, even though we are completely aware that reality is multi-layered and complex, it feels that as if there is somehow a latent interdiction, that you cannot take too many liberties or creative stances towards what is perceived as reality, which is exactly what has been questioned throughout the 90s, that reality itself is a kind of construct, and that the gaze and the strategy of a filmmaker can deconstruct that, and not necessarily offering a set of answers, but simply let the audience participate in the process. And we have seen that happening over and over again. And for instance, the way that Eyal Sivan, in his film with Michel Cléfi, was asking questions to the settlers in Palestine, and how this different kind of approach allowed some forgotten stories to resurface and so on. So I think that for me in documentary, quite honestly, the real important thing is, rather than the film as end result, for me what is important is the film as a process. That's what extremely interesting, because it allows the viewer more freedom to access how the film has actually been made. Whereas when you submit a set of answers, it seems to me, but that's just my perception, that you are somehow limiting the conversation.
Well, I agree. I agree completely. And so similarly, going back to the issue of representation, for example, I think it's a very legit issue. I think we institutional people, we people of power, have to be very careful in not creating a hierarchy of I don't know what comes first. Like, we can talk about the issue of representation, but we also have to talk about again the issues inherent to the community that is represented. I'm not trying to get complicated. I'm just making an example about my films. Stop the Bunny Heart, 2013. The debate was around this kind of enmeshment, convergence, divergence, clash of between documentary and fiction. The questions or the debate about my film at that time was kind of a up and coming filmmaker with this first film for the first time in a very, very big scenario stage like Cannes. That triggered a debate, and it was more about whether the story was believable. And I had never and it's been already 8 years showing the film, not a single time have I read a comment, or perhaps rarely. I'd never received an answer about the burning cross and the presence of Ku Klux Klan and right-wing extremisms in the American South. And that baffled me, because we can be talking all day long about my motives for combining narrative, filmmaking, so more attuned to fiction with observation, and that is one aspect. We can even talk about representation. Me as a non-religious person, or documenting people who follow non-secular traditions. But how about getting into the film and validating or questioning what's happening within the film? As I said, that is a small story that is symptomatic of a bigger experience. So when we are stuck in these discourses that are more theoretical, yet albeit legit, and then sometimes documentary viewers or critics, they forget the fact that the most important part is the experience that you're presenting, the communities that you putting a light on. And I think we have to be very careful with that. Like the same with um, my latest film. There's been a lot of debate around representation of the other, me representing or an African American community, but there has been very little debate around the fact that I am documenting and witnessing police brutality. And nobody's ever asked me what happened to the people victim of the brutality. I have a lot of stories on that. The police attacked towards us because we were with the group of protesters. People ended up in the hospital. People ended up in jail. What happened to them? The lawsuit that followed. No questions around that. And then as George Floyd and the likes were killed by the police and they made the news, the martyrdom of some, and then finally people realized that perhaps I was not just the question, perhaps I've been wasting a little bit of time in the issue of representation, that this should have dedicated a little bit of that time into what is the essence of the film, which was again representing a struggle of a community. And there are facts. That is the reality of documentary, because I'm reporting things that are happening, and that is not a intellectualization of anything. Police brutality was very tangible, and that's why it's in the film.
Absolutely. This is something that I totally understand. And somehow, what I mean, what you are saying brings to mind that, for instance, in Shaka King's film, Judas and the Black Messiah, the archive images of the Panthers from back in the day come from also from the images that shot Agnes Varda in the 60s, and this and images are still relevant today. Obviously, there is always the risk that you start speaking, taking the place of someone whose voice has not been heard. But then it also comes down to what is a filmmaking strategy. What Agnes Varda and what you are doing is quite different from the sensationalistic news that we are getting all the time. I mean, this is something more akin to community building, to creating the opportunity not for someone to take the word, but for the word to be shared. And
Yeah.
what I mean, I really, going back and rewatching your films. I mean, in Louisiana, when you are watching the film today, I mean, and I hope this is not downsizing the importance of your film, but when I was watching the images of the attack of the Capitol, I immediately thought of Louisiana, the other side, because that was really the other side being completely in the open. So the thing is, the way you approach those people and they allowed you to film them, it seems that what is lost is exactly the process in which you yourself put yourself in a kind of very extreme situation. It's not just switching on the camera, but everything that brings you to that point before you switch on the camera, meaning that there's a big chunk of work that needs to be done in order to get a certain kind of images. So I think that coming from a different place is exactly what makes films meaningful and interesting, because a filmmaker needs to elaborate a strategy, needs to be accepted or not in a community, and the making of the film is also the permanence of the filmmaker, the crew, the whole process inside of this community. And this, for me, produces not an image, but produces some sets of differences that become the common knowledge of a wider conversation.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And that is what you described, this process of the filmmaker, the path, the long, tortuous, treacherous path that allows finally a filmmaker, speaking for myself at least, allows me to finally get to the point where I can actually attempt at making a film, not even making the film. That is the experience I was talking about. It's hard to see all that sometimes, perhaps when you just said that you did that by being brought back to the other side of Louisiana. But for some, it's hard sometimes. So it's easy to dismiss the fact because they see, as I said, the story, which is just a reflection of the big experience that brought me to make the film. And it's sometimes too easy or reductive to say perhaps the process is the film or the voice of the filmmaker or me, it takes place or replaces other voices. There is a long process for which if I gain their trust, is precisely because the people in my films have made sure, or I felt comfortable enough knowing that their voices will be heard and they will not be appropriated by the filmmakers. Also, such process that, like you said, there's a lot in place. It's years of and the filmmaker knows how to do this. Does this for a living. I do this for a living. It's a big commitment. There is no beginning and no end. It's an ongoing process for which I get involved with communities, and the film is one of the testaments of that. And then, making sure that those voices are heard doesn't only happen. It's not something that I care about as I'm making the film. The film has a life that outlives, that lasts longer than my own. There is the way people can speak about the film around the world. In the last film, Judy Hill, the female character, the Black Panther Party, they have traveled way more than I have on behalf of the film, and they share their experience way more than I did. So there are ways of making sure the voices are heard, and that is all part of making the film, because making the film is also handling, not just handling the gestation. It's also because then the film is born, but it's also taking responsibility for the growth of the film that then will age. And until I'm alive, I need to take care of this, and I need to take care of all the complexities, the intricacies inherent in the film. And I had to make sure that people who are involved in the film, the communities, those people will continue to have a voice that will not be stay unheard, that will not be sedated, silenced for the time being. And this is not an abstract process for those who are listening. This is not conceptual. This is really a day-to-day thing that we have to do, making sure that we schedule calls, events, the Panther speaking in London last week, and so on and so forth. It's an ongoing process. I think a filmmaker, when I make this work, I never think of myself as someone who's going to just make a film. I think of myself as someone who's carrying a responsibility, and that responsibility will stay with me until I'm alive. So it's a big project.
Yeah, and what is interesting is that people try to sometimes, I mean, I hope this doesn't sound too overcritical, but sometimes it seems that there is only one gaze in play, meaning the gaze of the director that conveys some power structures. But what is interesting in your films, that the image is also the result of how the people look at you. I mean, especially in the film about what are you going to do when the world is on fire, it is clearly perceived that the people are not passively in front of the camera, but the way they look at the camera, the way they interact with you is also questioning very precisely what you are doing and what the sense of what you are doing. And the same thing happens, for instance, in Louisiana, where even if the people seem to be over eager to display their guns, but there is also always this kind of undercurrent of threat, like, we show you how we are, but you better be careful. And I mean, it's up to the director, and what ultimately makes the quality and the strength of the picture, this walking, this very thin line between working for your own creative process, but still dealing and reorganizing and reacting to all this kind of energies.
Yeah, no, absolutely. That's important too. You know, what you're saying is very important. I think today in documentary, it is baffling to me the fact that the performance of the self, because there is a performance, this is a film realm, so is considered an aberration, a manipulation of reality. But the performance of, as if Nina Simone using instruments and the element of singing versus speaking would be an aberration of the reality of the messages that she was trying to convey. The performance of the self, as I said, there's an experience and there's a story we need to build, and the story is done through, you know, a language, and the language needs the performance of the self. That is not a lower level of reality. I would argue the opposite in documentary, that the obsession of directors to trying to tame the performative aspect, which is a part of the self, and it's also a great defense mechanism for people. It's part of being who we are. That is the biggest manipulation or alteration of reality. That is altering our reality, not allowing people to perform who they are for us. Conveying some truth cannot be conveyed otherwise. How you going to do that? I mean, the awareness, so the fact that we are doing it for camera, the awareness of the fact that we will be edited out sometimes, is something that me as a director, I must make sure that they understand. So when I say this scene might last 6 minutes, based on my experience, you might have 6 minutes for this. We're going to film it for 2.5 hours, but this will be 6 minutes. You might, my dear character, be very mindful of that. Be very mindful of the fact that you had to gather all you have, therefore perform, to make sure that you will convey what you want to convey in a few minutes. Because I can be here, you know, we're here for months creating this catharsis, and yet I'll give you 6 minutes for the scene. If you're lucky, sometimes I'll give you 2. So that is actually, for me, how do I enhance reality. But to impose the neutrality of performance, therefore neutrality of self from the top, that is the clear aberration. There is the mutilation of reality, which is done from the perspective of those want to believe a certain kind of reality. We see that in fiction. There are films who tell us stories of despair with people never smiling. I mean, I can mention, I'm not going to, because I'm an active filmmaker, and there are some other people are active filmmaker, but there are tricks, filmmaking tricks, and yet they go along with the idea that we have a reality or struggle. So they reinforce the status quo. So in other words, for me, the performance of the self is extremely important. Not only do I allow it, people ask me, maybe somebody in the audience wanted to ask me that. Do you think the presence of the camera will alter reality? No, I think it enhances it, because it allows people, it makes them aware of the fact that we have a very limited space and time, and you have to make great use of it. This is not what we're doing now, speaking for 45 minutes. This is a film, and you're going to have just a handful of minutes to be
Yeah,
yourself.
I do absolutely agree with you on that, because I think that I mean, it would be too easy, but I'm going to do it anyway, to quote, even though not verbatim, Baudrillard, when he said that the real miracle is not a certain kind of surplus of reality, that the real miracle is not the augmentation of reality, but the sudden disappearance of reality. And this has always been one of the key points in my mind when I was watching so-called documentary works, because reality as such does not exist. It exists as certain pattern of conflicts, a certain set of contradictions, but reality as a kind of abstract, untouchable truth. I mean, being myself non-religious, I don't think that such a thing exists. Maybe the political relationships, the political contradiction that give existence to a certain pattern of reality that exists, as Eyal Sivan or Avi Mograbi have always been so accurate in showing what that was and how those sets and pattern worked. But
Yeah, absolutely. No, but it's true. I mean, Baudrillard, which I love. I mean, I'm not a particularly well-read person, but at the same time, I bumped on Baudrillard's books, and obviously his idea on simulacra is, in the end, what there is simulacra, something, and you had to deal with it. And I think the least interesting aspect of documentary filmmaking is the believability. Believability bears no value. It's almost yeah, it's missing the point, because in the end, once we assert the fact that the stories belong to the people, the fact that it's presented in a believable, not believable way, it's irrelevant, because what makes something believable is influenced by so many things that have to do with whomever interacts with the film anyway. So it's just a believability. And I've heard, in Cannes, the other side, I've been criticized by eminent documentary filmmakers because I was competing for a documentary prize. We're talking Nicolas Philibert, we're talking Riti Pan, and the issue not believing was actually what made some of them hate my work, and which is fine with me. But the point is, to me, that is missing the point, the believability. And it's also dismissing that is dismissive of a community. What would I? That is not giving voice to people. What did people do so that their stories are not believable? Is it possible that me, with my form, I annihilated, I have erased any sort of believability? When you see a burning cross, when you see a clash with the police, when you see people blowing up a car with an Obama mask in there, is it really that hard to believe that comes, what you see comes from experience, the experience of the real? We can get stuck in the ethics of documentary on the believability aspect of it. We can talk about it, but we can't get stuck there. That
but
makes our work very thin.
then again, it seems that there are many different strategies in conveying the multi-layered image of what we perceive as reality. For me, one, but again, this is just my personal view. For me, one of the issues with documentary is exactly what you just described as believability. I mean, when you show something as if it is true, since it is documentary, it will automatically perceived as if true and believable, and therefore it seems to uh, it seems to limitate all the other possibilities of all the other conversations that we might have. And what I think is interesting is in documentary is exactly those kind of forms that work against the idea that there's just one truth, that there is just one reality, because this opens up a different set of strategies in order to have deeper, longer, and maybe more complex conversations, and to adopt a form that questions the documentary form in itself, even though as the film unfolds. This, I think, is quite interesting.
Yeah, no, so precisely that. I mean, it's if we stuck in the issue of believability, it just we are credibility, and then we are narrowing down the possibilities of making documentary filmmaking do something that is status quo, that is gives you this illusion, as I said before, of reality, that we are part of a bigger experience, which is not true because we have not experienced it. So all I can do is trigger an idea, trigger a bigger reflection. At least that's what's important for me. Films need to be a trigger. What? It depends. To come to Texas or Louisiana and experience it, to deepen the knowledge. You know, that is an individual journey of which I have no control. But films are triggered. They're not all there is reality. And that's the most important part of documentary. But it's crazy that today it's still very difficult to speak in those terms. I guess it's hard to let go of the way of making documentaries. There was this very reassuring way that what we see is the answer, is an answer. Finally, we got answers, which is a very passive way of conceiving documentaries. Yeah.
Well, before we say goodbye to Roberto and to the audience, maybe it's time to check if there are some questions to some of the issues we have been trying to discuss here. I don't see any questions popping up in my chat. So before saying goodbye, Roberto, I would love to know what are you currently working on, and if fiction, quote unquote fiction, is something that would be tempting to you.
I don't know exactly what I'm working on because I'm working on a few things at the same time and I've not made a decision. It's funny because something has been financed. I have financing in place for a film that that I haven't even written. Such is the the beauty of having gained some recognition, or the irony. But as far as fiction, yeah, I am. Not only am I interested, but I'm thinking that maybe its time has come to push the pause button on the discourse over real reality, cinema of the real, representation of the real, representation of the other, and on the issues concerning making documentaries. And perhaps for me, time has come to work on something that is more properly fictional, and through that, again, if through that convey another experience. There's a bigger experience for me. It's the process of making films, the process of interacting with people, actors or non-actors, doesn't matter, trying to gather from their experience to create something that might not be pertinent to their lives, but it might be pertinent to their emotional realm. So I'm interested in that. So in other words, using fiction not to just represent a reality that is the tangible truth of facts, factual reality, but maybe their own emotional reality of the people interpreting fiction. I'm very interested in that. So yes, the answer is this might be the time where I'm doing something fictional, and I have a couple projects that I'm working simultaneously on, and one of them will be made whenever it's possible, maybe soon.
So thank you so much, Roberto, for your time. We are definitely looking forward with whatever project you will be first tackling, and we are holding our breath because we believe that you are certainly one of the very, very interesting filmmakers that are really questioning the medium of making films today and making it a meaningful experience for the viewer and for the filmmaking community and programmers at large. So thank you again, Roberto, for your time and for your heartfelt insights into the process of your work. Thank you so much. And thank you also to all of you out there in the World Wide Web who have been following this conversation, which I hope that has been interesting and meaningful to you all. Stay safe out there and see you soon in the real world.
Thank you.